On July 16, 2022, the Williams family was on a camping trip in Banff National Park, Canada's oldest national park. Mark and Lisa Williams decided that their kids, Jake and Emma, needed some time away from the city, and Banff National Park seemed like the perfect place for them to spend some quality time together and reconnect with nature. Although reticent at first, the kids quickly came around and started enjoying their vacation. Jake, who was 10, and Emma, who was 12, liked exploring the park's dense coniferous forests alongside their parents. The family spent that Saturday hiking along scenic trails and marveling at the park's breathtaking vistas before returning to their camping site. They all shared a family-sized tent. As the sun began to set, they gathered around the campfire to roast marshmallows and share stories. The flickering flames cast a warm glow, and the smell of toasted marshmallows filled the air. This vacation, Mark and Lisa thought, would definitely become a cherished memory for the kids. Emma and Jake were pretty tired after a day of hiking, so they enjoyed their treat silently. But the tranquility of the evening was about to come to an abrupt end. Mark heard a rustling noise in the bushes nearby. He glanced up, alert but not overly concerned. He didn't want to scare Lisa and the kids. After all, they'd seen plenty of deer and squirrels earlier in the day. Yes, a deer. That was probably the source of the noise, but Mark Williams was wrong. In a flash, a black bear emerged from the shadows, ambling into their campsite. The animal was large for a black bear. Its fur was matted. The animal sniffed the air, no doubt smelling their food. Its eyes locked onto their leftovers. Mark asked his family to stay calm and not move. His voice was barely a whisper. He slowly rose to his feet, keeping his eyes on the bear. Lisa pulled Jake and Emma closer, her heart pounding in her chest. The bear moved closer, somewhat cautiously. It didn't look aggressive, but wild animals are always unpredictable. Mark Williams had to protect his family. Lucky for them, Mark remembered the park ranger's safety briefing. Make noise, appear large, and never run. He grabbed a metal pot and began banging it with a spoon, shouting to scare the bear away. But instead of retreating, the bear grew agitated, feeling cornered by the sudden commotion. With a low growl, it reared up on its hind legs, towering over the campsite. Lisa screamed, pulling the children even closer. The bear's aggression had escalated rapidly, and Mark's attempts to protect his family had only made the situation more dangerous. This was an unusual black bear. Mark stepped forward, trying to shield his family from the bear. "Stay back!" he shouted, hoping to intimidate the animal. But the bear, now feeling threatened, lunged at him. Mark fell to the ground and instinctively threw his arm in front of his face to protect his head. The bear opened its massive jaws and clamped down hard on Mark's arm. A searing pain shot through Mark's arm. Lisa's scream pierced the air, and the children cried out in terror. The bear briefly released Mark, then attacked him again, this time targeting the man's right shoulder. Lisa and the kids watched as Mark was being mauled. But then, something happened. They heard hurried footsteps and men shouting. A park ranger let them know help was on the way, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. Another ranger raised a tranquilizer gun, taking careful aim. The bear, now faced with multiple threats, turned its attention away from Mark. With a sharp pop, the tranquilizer dart found its mark, embedding in the bear's shoulder. The bear roared in anger and pain, but within moments its movements became sluggish. It swayed on its feet before collapsing to the ground, its eyes slowly closing as the tranquilizer took effect. Meanwhile, Mark was on the ground, trying his best not to scream. His wounds were bleeding and they hurt. But Mark didn't want to further traumatize Jake and Emma. They were just kids. His breath came in ragged gasps. Lisa rushed to his side. She was crying. The rangers assessed the situation and quickly realized they needed to take Mark Williams to a hospital. He was losing lots of blood. To top things worse, he was becoming less and less alert. Within minutes, an ambulance arrived, and paramedics began treating Mark's wounds. They worked swiftly, stabilizing him before loading him onto a stretcher. Lisa and the children followed, their faces pale and drawn with worry. As the ambulance sped towards the nearest hospital, the rangers secured the campsite and monitored the tranquilized bear. But the bear's sudden aggressive behavior has deemed a threat to tourists. The bear was shot and killed. Mark Williams had to undergo multiple surgeries to treat his wounds, but he survived. When he woke up, he asked about the bear. He was saddened to hear the bear had to be put down, but he was also relieved the animal wouldn't be a danger anymore. The Williams family's harrowing experience served as a powerful reminder of the delicate balance between humans and wildlife. For Mark, Lisa, Jake, and Emma, their camping trip had taken a terrifying turn, but it had also brought them closer together. A group of seasoned mountaineers set out on a challenging expedition in the remote regions of the Swiss Alps, an area known for its breathtaking beauty and rugged terrain. The group, consisting of 5 experienced hikers, Peter, Anna, Lars, Martina, and Felix, had been planning this trip for months. They were all passionate about the outdoors and had spent years exploring mountain ranges around the world. The Swiss Alps, with their towering peaks and serene valleys, were the perfect destination for their latest adventure. The group chose a route that led them through the less-traveled paths of the Valais region, known for its stunning views of the Matterhorn and other majestic peaks. The weather was ideal for hiking, with clear skies and a cool breeze that made the strenuous climbs more bearable. The mountaineers were well prepared, carrying all the necessary equipment, including hiking poles, ropes, and first aid supplies. They were familiar with the risks of high-altitude hiking, such as sudden weather changes and the possibility of avalanches, but they felt confident in their abilities and their preparation. As they ascended higher into the mountains, the group marveled at the untouched beauty of the landscape. The glaciers gleamed in the sunlight, and the air was crisp and pure. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots on the rocky paths and the distant calls of birds. The mountaineers were in high spirits, enjoying the camaraderie that comes with such a shared adventure. They had planned to reach a remote mountain hut by late afternoon, where they would rest for the night before continuing their journey the next day. However, as they trekked through a narrow pass, they encountered something unexpected and terrifying. Unbeknownst to them, a grizzly bear had wandered into the area, likely migrating from a nearby region due to changing environmental conditions. The bear, unfamiliar with the terrain and agitated by the strange surroundings, had been foraging in the area when it noticed the approaching hikers. The mountaineers were taken by surprise when they spotted the large, imposing figure of the bear emerging from behind a cluster of rocks. The bear, already on edge, reacted aggressively to the presence of the group. The lead hiker, Peter, was closest to the bear, and before the group could fully comprehend the danger, the bear charged. Peter tried to back away slowly, but the bear's speed was overwhelming. The group quickly attempted to scare the bear off, using their hiking poles to make noise and appear larger. They shouted and waved their arms, hoping to deter the bear, but the bear's agitation only seemed to increase. It lunged at Peter, knocking him to the ground with its powerful paws. The other hikers, though desperate to help, were forced to retreat, fearing for their own safety as they tried to find a way to save their friend. The once serene and peaceful alpine landscape had turned into a scene of chaos and fear. The group's efforts to fend off the bear seemed futile against the sheer power and aggression of the animal. Peter, gravely injured, was in critical condition, and the group realized that their expedition had taken a deadly turn. The Swiss Alps, once a symbol of tranquility and natural beauty, had become the site of a brutal encounter, highlighting the unpredictable dangers that can arise in even the most familiar of environments. As the bear continued its relentless attack on Peter, the other mountaineers knew they had to act quickly to save his life. Desperate and terrified, they began to throw rocks and use their hiking poles to strike the ground, creating as much noise and disturbance as possible. Their frantic efforts eventually startled the bear enough that it paused, giving the group a brief window to pull Peter away from the immediate danger. The bear, still agitated, retreated back into the rocky terrain, disappearing into the landscape from which it had emerged. The group wasted no time in attending to Peter's injuries. He was bleeding heavily, with deep wounds on his chest and arms from the bear's powerful claws. The mountaineers quickly applied pressure to the wounds and used the first aid supplies they had brought with them, doing their best to stabilize him. The remote location made it impossible to call for immediate help, but they knew they had to get Peter to safety as soon as possible. The mountaineers carefully carried Peter down the mountain, moving as quickly and steadily as they could. The journey was grueling, with every step bringing more pain to their injured friend. The steep rocky paths that had once been a source of awe now felt like a cruel obstacle course. The group's focus was solely on getting Peter to medical help, and the hours passed in a blur of exhaustion and anxiety. Finally, they reached a lower elevation, where they were able to contact rescue services. A helicopter was dispatched to their location, and within a short time, Peter was airlifted to a hospital in Sion, a town in the heart of the Valais region. At the hospital, the medical team was ready to treat Peter's injuries. He was rushed into surgery, where doctors worked tirelessly to repair the damage caused by the bear's attack. The hospital was tense as the other hikers waited for news of their friend. The doctors were able to stabilize Peter, but his recovery would be long and difficult. The severity of his injuries meant that he would require extensive physical therapy, and the emotional trauma of the attack would take time to heal as well. The group, once so full of excitement and anticipation for their adventure, was now left grappling with the harsh reality of what had happened. The incident sent shockwaves through the mountaineering community and beyond. The unexpected presence of a grizzly bear in the Swiss Alps was a stark reminder of the changing patterns of wildlife due to climate change. The event sparked widespread discussions about the need for better awareness and preparedness for such encounters in areas once considered safe. The once idyllic image of the Swiss Alps was now tinged with a sense of caution, as both locals and visitors came to terms with the new risks posed by the shifting balance of nature. Arctic, with its vast expanse of ice and extreme conditions, is a realm where only the most resilient survive. Polar bears, apex predators in this unforgiving environment, face the harshest of challenges. A month-long expedition led by seasoned explorers aimed to document the effects of climate change in this hostile region. The team was aware of the dangers: biting cold, shifting ice, unpredictable weather, and the looming threat of polar bears. The team comprised 5 members: Graham, the experienced expedition leader; Aubrey, the young climatologist; Derek, a marine biologist studying the region's wildlife; Andre, an Arctic photographer; and Lamar, an expert in glaciology. Their mission was clear: gather crucial data on the Arctic's changing conditions. Each day, they ventured onto the ice, meticulously documenting the transformations occurring in the environment. Every aspect of the expedition was planned with precision. The team was equipped with cutting-edge thermal imaging technology, durable tents, flare guns, and early warning systems for detecting large animals. Yet, in the unpredictable Arctic, even the best-laid plans could falter. As the weeks progressed, the team observed alarming changes. Ice flows, once solid and stable, now cracked and drifted more frequently. Temperature fluctuations were more extreme, and wildlife sightings were scarce. Derek noted the absence of seals, a critical prey for polar bears. This absence suggested that hungry bears might become increasingly desperate and aggressive. One evening, while setting up camp on a drifting ice floe, the team was enveloped by the dim light of Arctic twilight. The horizon was a vast white expanse, occasionally interrupted by distant icebergs. Despite the serene appearance, there was an underlying tension. The day's grim findings had added weight to their mission. The team worked swiftly to establish their camp. They chose the floe for its stability, but were aware that the ice's unpredictability required them to remain alert and ready to move. Graham, ever vigilant, ensured that tripwires and flares were correctly placed, knowing that their presence might attract the Arctic's apex predators. As night fell and temperatures plummeted, the team huddled in their main tent, analyzing the day's data and planning for the days ahead. The flow's increasing drift added urgency to their discussions. They needed to act strategically to complete their mission before the end of the expedition. Unbeknownst to the team, a large male polar bear was prowling the flow's edges. Driven by hunger and desperation, the bear had been traversing the ice for days in search of seals. The bear's acute sense of smell had detected the explorers' scent from afar, guiding it toward their camp with relentless determination. The bear, its thick fur blending with the ice, approached the camp stealthily. The explorers remained unaware of the predator's presence, focusing on their work and discussions. The Arctic's vast and silent expanse held both beauty and danger, a constant reminder of the wilderness's unpredictability. As the bear approached the camp, it moved with a cautious, almost stealthy gait. It knew the terrain well, navigating the cracks and crevices in the ice with ease. The bear's massive paws, designed for traction on the slippery surface, made barely a sound. Its sharp and alert eyes scanned the camp, taking in the tents and the equipment. The bear could sense the presence of the humans, and its instincts were on high alert. Inside the tent, the team remained oblivious to the danger lurking outside. They were focused on their work, unaware that the bear had drawn dangerously close. The tripwires and flares, their first line of defense, were in place, but the bear, driven by hunger, was undeterred. It circled the camp, its nostrils flaring as it picked up the scent of food and human sweat. The bear's muscles tensed, its predatory instincts kicking in as it prepared to strike. As the night deepened, Graham decided to check the camp's perimeter one last time before turning in. He stepped out into the frigid air, his breath visible in the cold. He moved methodically, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, scanning for any signs of movement. He knew that in the Arctic, vigilance was essential to us, survival. But the bear, sensing the movement, had already set its sights on a different target. Lamar had ventured out to retrieve some equipment from a sled that had been left near the edge of the camp. He moved quickly, wanting to get back inside where it was warm. But as he approached the sled, the bear, driven by its primal need to feed, made its move. The attack was swift and brutal, a blur of motion in the dark. The polar bear lunged at Lamar with a force that belied its size, its mighty jaws clamping down on his shoulder and driving him to the ground. Lamar's survival instincts surged, but the bear's overwhelming strength made resistance nearly impossible. Its claws tore through his clothing and flesh, inflicting excruciating pain that radiated through his body. Lamar struggled, his hands flailing uselessly against the bear's thick fur. The creature's grip was relentless, its teeth sinking deeper with each second. His mind was a chaotic swirl of pain, fear, and disbelief. Despite his awareness of the risks and his preparedness for a potential encounter, nothing could have readied him for this brutal reality. The rest of the team heard the commotion and rushed outside, but by the time they reached Lamar, it was too late. The bear, sensing their approach, emitted a deep guttural growl that echoed across the ice. With a final, savage shake of its head, it dragged Lamar's lifeless body away into the darkness. The team was left in shock, struggling to process the horror of what had occurred. The icy wind carried the scent of blood, and the bear's growl, a grim reminder of their vulnerability. They realized that pursuing the bear would only lead to further tragedy. The stark reality of their situation hit hard. They were alone in one of Earth's most remote and unforgiving regions, at the mercy of a predator with no compassion. Seeking refuge, they retreated to their emergency shelter, a reinforced tent designed for extreme conditions, but offering little solace in the face of such violence. Huddled together, they shivered from both the cold and the raw fear that gripped them. The air was thick with shock, each member haunted by the memory of Lamar's screams. Graham, the leader, knew immediate action was necessary. He ordered an evacuation and sent out a distress call to their support team stationed miles away. The support team, well-versed in Arctic dangers, responded swiftly. Yet even as preparations for evacuation began, the weight of Lamar's loss hung heavily over them. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as they awaited rescue. The ordinarily peaceful Arctic sounds now felt ominous, as if the ice itself was closing in on them. The bear's attack had left a searing mark on their minds, a constant reminder of the peril that lurked in the Arctic's icy expanse. Their unity, once their strength, now felt fragile in the face of such a devastating loss. When the rescue team arrived, the explorers were physically unharmed, but emotionally shattered. They had come to the Arctic to study climate change and witness the environment's transformations. Still, instead, they were confronted with the brutal reality of survival in one of the planet's harshest landscapes. The morning sun had barely crested over the ridges of a park in the United States of America, casting long shadows across the landscape as a group of 5 hikers made their way along a narrow, winding trail. The sky above was a bright blue, and the towering trees flanked the path, giving the illusion of safety in the wilderness. Among the group were Caleb, the most experienced of the hikers, his cousin Owen, friends Sawyer and Garrett, and Maya, an avid nature enthusiast eager to capture the perfect photograph of the wild beauty around them. The trail they had chosen was less popular, weaving through steep ridges with abrupt drop-offs that tumbled into rocky ravines below. The sense of adventure heightened as they ascended higher, the path narrowing with each step. Overhead, birds occasionally called, and in the distance, the faint rush of a river echoed through the still air. As they rounded a sharp bend in the trail, a sudden rustling sound echoed from the dense brush ahead. Caleb signaled the group to halt, his senses alert. In the silence that followed, the source of the sound became painfully clear. A grizzly bear cub no older than a few months emerged from the bushes on the trail ahead of them. The cub, curious and unaware of the group, paused to sniff the air, its small frame adorably clumsy, but a stark reminder that where there was a cub, a mother was indeed not far behind. The hikers froze, their eyes wide with apprehension. Caleb, his heart now pounding, gestured for the group to slowly back away. But before they could make any headway, a heavy grunt came from behind them, echoing up the trail. There, from the direction they had just come, a massive female grizzly bear emerged, her fur bristling and her dark eyes locking onto the hikers with deadly intent. She was much closer than the cub and far more dangerous. The hikers now found themselves in an impossible situation. The mother grizzly stood behind them, her hulking figure blocking the only path down, while the cub was directly in front, its confused mewling drawing the mother closer. They were trapped, with cliffs dropping off on either side of the narrow trail and nowhere to flee without risking a fatal fall. The grizzly mother let out a deep, guttural growl, a clear sign of her growing agitation. She was torn between protecting her cub and eliminating what she saw as a threat. Her massive body shifted on the path, her claws scraping against the loose rock and dirt as she began to inch forward. The cub, hearing its mother, started to meander toward her, but the group stood in its way. Caleb motioned to retreat slowly, stepping backward inch by inch, but as the group complied, disaster struck. Garrett, who had been standing closest to the edge of the trail, placed his weight on a patch of loose rock. The ground beneath him gave way without warning, sending him tumbling toward the cliff edge. His arms flailed as he tried to catch himself, but the sudden movement startled the already tense grizzly. The mother bear charged. Her massive frame barreled forward with terrifying speed, closing the gap in mere seconds. Caleb's heart raced as he watched Garrett scramble to regain his footing. The sudden surge of movement from the bear sent loose rocks cascading down the cliffside, the sound of them crashing below adding to the chaos. The hikers were in a state of panic now, their retreat faltering. The mother grizzly's powerful strides brought her terrifyingly close, her teeth bared and eyes wild with fury. Maya stumbled backward, her camera clattering to the ground, forgotten in the sheer terror of the moment. Garrett managed to stop his fall just as the bear reached the group. Her massive paw swiped through the air, narrowly missing him but striking Owen, who had been closest to Garrett, in an attempt to help him. Owen crumpled to the ground, gasping as the bear's claws raked across his torso, leaving deep gashes that immediately began to bleed. Sawyer, in his desperation to avoid the bear's attack, made a break for the cliffside, misjudging the distance. His foot slipped on the crumbling rocks, and he went down hard, his body skidding dangerously close to the edge. The sharp stones beneath him tore through his clothes and skin, but the proximity to the sheer drop kept him frozen in place, unable to move without risking falling to his death. Caleb, paralyzed by the sight of his friend's injuries, struggled to think. The bear, now fully committed to defending her cub, reared up on her hind legs, standing over 7 feet tall. She let out a roar that echoed through the canyon, her massive bulk casting a long shadow over the crumpled hikers below her. As the bear came down on all fours again, her eyes flicked toward Garrett, who was still scrambling to find solid ground. The movement caught her attention, and she charged again, her claws digging deep into the earth. Garrett, realizing too late that he was her next target, barely managed to roll to the side as the grizzly lunged, but his movements caused the cliff edge to give way beneath him. His body plunged downward, arms grasping at air as he fell, disappearing from view as the group helplessly watched. Owen, gasping for breath through the pain, tried to crawl away, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. Caleb, now fully realizing the hopelessness of the situation, frantically searched for a way to get the group out of this nightmare. The cub had wandered off the trail, and the mother bear, still enraged, was pacing back and forth, growling menacingly, her eyes darting between the remaining hikers. Maya, shaking with fear, pulled herself up from the dirt, only to see that Sawyer had slid even closer to the cliff's edge. His fingers clawed at the loose ground, desperately trying to find purchase. Caleb moved toward him, hoping to pull him back to safety, but the bear caught sight of the movement. With a terrifying roar, she lunged again. Caleb's heart raced as the grizzly charged straight at him. He could feel the ground trembling beneath her weight as she closed the distance. Just as she was about to reach him, Maya threw herself in the opposite direction, hoping to distract the bear. The grizzly hesitated for a split second, her attention shifting between Caleb and Maya before she finally turned toward her cub, now out of sight down the trail. The bear, sensing that her cub had wandered away, gave one final growl before retreating down the trail, her massive body vanishing into the underbrush. The hikers, bruised, bleeding, and terrified, could only stare at each other in disbelief, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. Caleb looked down the cliff where Garrett had fallen, the silence below unbearable. The group, though alive, was shattered. Their bond tested in the most harrowing of circumstances. The wilderness had brutally reminded them that in Yellowstone, nature held the ultimate power. The Appalachian Mountains stretched endlessly with their dense, rugged forests. As dawn broke, Jack moved silently through the underbrush, his boots barely making a sound on the damp earth. The sun's early rays cast long shadows, and the forest stirred with the soft rustling of waking wildlife. Having hunted these woods for over 2 decades, Jack knew the terrain intimately. His goal today was a mature buck he'd been tracking for days based on fresh tracks he'd seen by the creek. Every step Jack took was precise and measured, reflecting his deep familiarity with the wilderness. The forest, thick with towering oaks and maples, created a canopy of green and gold, filtering sunlight into a dotted pattern. Jack's rifle was slung over his shoulder, and his camouflage attire blended seamlessly with the surroundings. His breath was steady, his heartbeat slow. He was entirely in his element. As Jack followed the fresher tracks more profoundly into the woods, he noticed broken twigs, stray hairs, and faint hoof impressions. His pulse quickened with excitement. The forest grew denser, the scent of earth and decaying leaves filled the air, and the distant sound of running water reached him. Then he spotted new tracks, larger, deeper, and indicative of a bear. Jack crouched to inspect them, noting their fresh appearance and wandering pattern. Black bears roamed these woods, though encounters were rare. His attention shifted from the deer to the bear as a sudden rustle in the bushes made him freeze. Jack readied his rifle and moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the dense foliage. Through a break in the trees, he spotted the bear about 30 yards away, its massive form partially obscured by bushes. The bear was foraging, its snout buried in the undergrowth. Jack marveled at the sight, but remained alert. Just as he decided to retreat, his foot slipped on a loose stone, creating a sharp noise. The bear's head snapped up, its eyes locking onto Jack. A tense standoff ensued, with Jack hoping the bear would lose interest. However, the bear's nostrils flared, detecting Jack's scent. Its body tensed, muscles rippling. And Jack knew the situation had changed. Bears are unpredictable. Their behavior is governed by instinct and circumstance. Jack understood this all too well, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. The bear, perhaps perceiving Jack as a threat to its food, let out a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the trees. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as the bear took a step toward him, its posture suddenly aggressive. He knew he had to act fast. Without thinking, Jack began to slowly back away, his rifle now raised slightly, ready to fire if necessary. He didn't want to shoot the bear. It wasn't necessary. If he could create enough distance, the bear might decide he wasn't worth the trouble. But the bear had other ideas. It took another step forward, then another, its growl deepening into a roar that sent birds scattering from the treetops. And then, in an instant, the bear charged. The speed of the attack was startling. One moment, the bear was several yards away. The next, it was thundering toward him, a blur of black fur and fury. Jack barely had time to react. He aimed his rifle, but the bear was too fast. It was on him before he could pull the trigger. The impact was like being hit by a freight train. The force of the bear's charge knocked Jack off his feet, sending him crashing to the ground with a bone-jarring thud. His rifle was torn from his hands, skidding across the dirt out of reach. The bear was on top of him, its powerful claws digging into his flesh, its teeth snapping inches from his face. The world became a blur of pain and chaos as Jack fought to free himself from the bear's relentless assault. Jack's survival instincts kicked in. He twisted and turned, using every ounce of strength he had to fend off the bear's attacks. But the bear was an unstoppable force, its claws ripping through his jacket, tearing into the skin beneath. Jack's vision blurred with the pain, but he forced himself to focus, to think. He knew that if he didn't find a way to escape, the bear would kill him. Somehow, in the chaos, Jack managed to roll onto his side, his hands scrabbling in the dirt for something, anything. that he could use to defend himself. His fingers brushed against a rock, smooth and cool under his touch. Without hesitation, he grabbed it, swinging it with all his might at the bear's head. The rock connected with a sickening thud, and for a split second the bear recoiled, stunned. It was the opening Jack needed. Ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder, he scrambled to his feet, lunging for his rifle, which lay a few feet away. But the bear recovered quickly. It roared in anger, its eyes wild with fury, and charged again. Jack could feel its hot breath on the back of his neck as he reached for his weapon, his fingers closing around the stock just as the bear's claws raked down his back. He fell to the ground, the rifle in his hands, and rolled onto his back, bringing the weapon up just as the bear lunged at him. There was no time to aim, no time to think. Jack squeezed the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the forest, a loud crack that seemed to hang in the air. The bear flinched, a look of shock in its eyes as the bullet grazed its shoulder. It wasn't a fatal shot, but it was enough to make the bear hesitate, enough to break the momentum of its attack. For a moment, the bear and Jack stared at each other, both panting heavily, both bloodied and exhausted. Then, slowly, the bear began to retreat. It backed away, its eyes never leaving Jack, as if weighing whether to continue the attack. But finally, with a snort of frustration, it turned and lumbered off into the woods, disappearing into the underbrush as quickly as it had appeared. Jack lay on the ground, his chest heaving with each ragged breath. Pain radiated from every part of his body, but he was alive. He had survived. He knew he had to move to get out of the forest and find help before his injuries overwhelmed him. But for a few moments he just lay there, staring up at the canopy of trees above, his mind reeling from the ordeal. Tom Sweeney, an avid fisherman, cherished the solitude of Alaska's rivers, where the natural world provided a perfect escape from modern chaos. In late August, during the peak of the salmon run, he had found a secluded spot along a remote riverbank. The river was alive with salmon fighting upstream, and Tom, in his well-worn waders, was immersed in the tranquil rhythm of fishing. The scent of pine and the soft blue sky made for a serene setting. Tom had risen early to secure this prime location. Each cast of his fly rod was precise, and soon he had hooked his first fish of the day. Hours passed in peaceful solitude as the sun rose higher and his creel filled with glistening salmon. Unbeknownst to Tom, a large grizzly bear had been silently observing him. Drawn by the scent of the fish, the powerful apex predator moved stealthily through the forest. Its deep brown fur and muscular frame were almost invisible against the underbrush, and the unfamiliar scent of a human piqued its curiosity. The bear kept its distance at first, evaluating the situation. It was accustomed to catching salmon, but was intrigued by the easy meal that the human seemed to be enjoying. With each step, the bear moved closer to the riverbank, its eyes fixed on Tom with predatory intent. Tom remained oblivious to the danger. Focused on landing a huge salmon, he didn't notice the bear's approach. The river's roar masked the bear's movement, and the grizzly was now just yards away, preparing to strike. Tom's attention was entirely on the fish, unaware of the massive shadow looming behind him. The attack was sudden and violent. The bear charged with astonishing speed, its massive body hurtling through the brush and onto the riverbank. The ground shook beneath its weight as it thundered forward, closing the distance in mere seconds. Tom barely had time to register the blur of motion before the bear was upon him, knocking him off his feet with a force that sent him crashing into the icy waters of the river. Disoriented and shocked, Tom struggled to regain his footing as the cold water closed around him. The world spun in a chaotic swirl of noise and pain, the river rushing in his ears as he tried to comprehend what had just happened. His fishing rod slipped from his grasp, the line trailing uselessly in the current as he flailed, trying to find some purchase on the slick riverbed. But the bear was relentless, its massive paws swiping at him with deadly precision. Tom's survival instincts kicked in. He knew that to survive a grizzly bear attack, one had to fight back to make oneself appear as large and threatening as possible. But in the water, disoriented and panicked, such logic was hard to grasp. He reached for his knife, fumbling with numb fingers as the bear's claws raked across his back, tearing through the thick fabric of his jacket. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot fire that seared through his nerves and sent shockwaves of terror coursing through his body. Finally, he managed to free the knife from its sheath, gripping it tightly as he tried to turn and face his attacker. The bear loomed over him, its maw open wide to reveal rows of sharp teeth, its breath hot and rank against his face. Tom slashed at the bear with all the strength he could muster, the blade finding its mark in the thick fur, but the bear was unfazed, its primal rage overriding any sense of pain or injury. With a powerful swipe of its paw, the bear knocked the knife from Tom's hand, sending it spinning into the river. Tom was defenseless now, reduced to little more than helpless prey in the face of the bear's fury. He struggled to escape, kicking and thrashing in the water, but the bear was too strong, too determined. It reared back on its hind legs before coming down with crushing force, its jaws closing around Tom's neck in a death grip. The world around Tom seemed to slow to a crawl, the sounds of the river fading into a distant hum. His vision darkened, the edges of his consciousness slipping away as the bear's teeth sank deeper into his flesh. There was no escaping the inevitable now, no hope of rescue or salvation. The bear's primal strength overwhelmed him completely, its massive body pinning him to the riverbed as it delivered the fatal bite. Tom's body went limp. The fight drained from him as life ebbed away. The bear, satisfied with its kill, dragged his lifeless form from the river and into the forest. The once peaceful riverbank was now a scene of violence and death, the water stained with Tom's blood as it rushed downstream. The bear, driven by its hunger, tore into Tom's flesh, feeding on the body with a savage intensity that only the wilderness could foster. Hours passed, and the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the river. The bear, having satisfied its hunger, left the remains of Tom's body deep within the forest, hidden from sight. The wilderness reclaimed the scene, the sounds of the river and the wind through the trees, returning to their natural rhythm. But the violence of the attack lingered, a stark reminder of the brutal reality that lurked beneath the surface of Alaska's pristine beauty. When Tom Sweeney failed to return as expected, his family grew alarmed. Known for his punctuality and routine, Tom's disappearance was out of character. As hours passed and night fell, anxiety turned into fear. By morning, they reported him missing, triggering a search and rescue operation in the remote wilderness where he had last been seen. Search teams scoured the dense forest and rugged terrain, with helicopters overhead and search dogs on the ground. Despite their efforts, days passed with no sign of Tom, dimming hopes of finding him alive. The breakthrough came at the riverbank, where they discovered bloodstains, torn clothing, and grizzly bear tracks. Following the trail into the forest, they found Tom's remains. The evidence of the bear's brutal attack was clear, leaving behind a scene of devastation. The news of Tom's death shocked his family and community. A cherished figure, Tom's loss was profound and served as a stark reminder of the dangers of Alaska's wild landscape, where the beauty of nature is coupled with its inherent risks. Early September 2012, a newlywed couple, Emily and David Thompson, set out on their dream honeymoon in the pristine wilderness of Montana's Glacier National Park. The park, known for its breathtaking views, rugged mountains, and abundant wildlife, had always been a place of wonder for the couple. Both Emily and David were avid nature lovers, and they shared a deep bond over their love for the outdoors. Their relationship had blossomed during their many hiking trips together, and they had often talked about exploring the vast beauty of Glacier National Park. Emily and David met in college. Both studying environmental science and their shared passion for nature quickly brought them together. They spent weekends hiking through forests, camping under the stars, and planning future adventures to some of the most beautiful natural places in the world. When they got married, it was only fitting that their honeymoon would be spent in a place that held so much meaning for them both. After their wedding, the couple decided that a trip to Glacier National Park would be the perfect way to start their new life together. The park, located in the Rocky Mountains of Montana, offered everything they could have hoped for: majestic peaks, serene lakes, and endless trails to explore. The idea of hiking through the untouched wilderness surrounded by the beauty of nature was a dream come true for them. On the morning of September 7th, Emily and David set out on what was supposed to be a peaceful hike along one of the park's many scenic trails. The weather was perfect, with clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine through the air. They had packed a light lunch and some snacks, planning to enjoy a picnic by one of the park's crystal-clear lakes. As they walked hand in hand along the trail, they marveled at the towering trees, the distant snow-capped peaks, and the tranquility that surrounded them. The trail was quiet, with only the occasional chirp of birds and the rustling of leaves underfoot. The couple felt completely at ease, soaking in the serenity of the moment and the joy of being together in such a beautiful place. Unbeknownst to them, a grizzly bear was also in the area, drawn by the scent of their snacks. Grizzly bears, native to the park, are known for their powerful sense of smell and territorial nature. The bear, likely searching for food before the long winter hibernation, had caught the scent and followed it, unknowingly closing in on the couple as they hiked. As Emily and David continued along the trail, they were completely unaware of the danger lurking nearby. The bear, sensing the presence of the couple, grew agitated and defensive. Suddenly, without any warning, the bear charged out of the underbrush, its massive form barreling toward them with terrifying speed. The peaceful hike turned into a nightmare in an instant, as the bear focused its aggression on David, who was caught off guard by the sudden attack. The serene landscape of Glacier National Park, which had been a symbol of their love and adventure, was now the setting for a tragic encounter with one of nature's most formidable predators. The grizzly bear's sudden charge left Emily in shock, but she quickly realized the danger they were in. David tried to protect Emily, stepping between her and the bear, but the bear's aggression was overwhelming. It knocked David to the ground with a powerful swipe, its claws tearing through his clothing and flesh. Despite Emily's desperate attempts to help, the bear's strength was too much. She grabbed a nearby branch and waved it, hoping to scare the bear away, but her efforts only seemed to anger it further. In the chaos, the bear focused its attack on David, who was now gravely injured. Emily, frantic and helpless, could only watch as the bear mauled her husband. The sounds of the attack echoed through the trees, breaking the silence of the peaceful morning. Emily screamed for help, but they were deep in the wilderness, far from any other hikers or assistants. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bear released David and retreated back into the underbrush, perhaps satisfied that the threat to its territory had been neutralized. Emily rushed to David's side, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding. David was barely conscious, his injuries severe. Emily knew they needed help immediately, but they were miles from the nearest ranger station. With no time to lose, Emily used her phone to call for emergency services, her voice shaking as she described their location and the attack. The park rangers, who were experienced in dealing with such incidents, responded quickly. A rescue helicopter was dispatched to their location, but Emily knew that every minute was critical. The helicopter arrived and airlifted David to Kalispell Regional Medical Center, the nearest hospital capable of treating such life-threatening injuries. The medical team at the hospital was prepared for the worst. David was rushed into surgery, where doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize him. Emily, who had been taken to the hospital alongside her husband, was in shock, her mind racing with fear and worry. Despite the doctor's best efforts, David's injuries were too severe. The trauma from the bear attack had caused irreparable damage, and after hours of surgery, the doctors were unable to save him. Emily was left to face the devastating reality that her husband, with whom she had just begun a new chapter in life, was gone. The tragic event sent shockwaves through the Glacier National Park community and beyond. Visitors and locals alike were reminded of the unpredictable dangers of hiking in bear country. Park authorities increased warnings and reinforced safety protocols, emphasizing the need for proper precautions, even on trails that seemed safe. Emily's loss became a heartbreaking testament to the raw power of nature and the importance of respecting the wilderness. Glacier National Park, with all its beauty and wonder, now also held the memory of a life tragically cut short. The sun rose over the zoo, casting long shadows across the enclosures. Frank Mulligan, a seasoned veteran of over 30 years, walked his familiar route one last time, filled with memories of the animals he had cared for. Today marked his retirement, a bittersweet milestone. Beside him was Sam, an enthusiastic rookie eager to learn the ropes. Sam's energy was infectious as he peppered Frank with questions about the animals and zoo operations. Frank, patient yet measured, offered advice, allowing Sam to observe and learn. Their dynamic was evident. Frank's cautious experience contrasted sharply with Sam's reckless enthusiasm. As they approached the brown bear enclosure, Frank's gaze fell on Kodiak, the zoo's largest bear, a hulking presence he had cared for since cubhood. Frank respected Kodiak's moods, always mindful of the bear's potential danger. Sam, however, had little direct interaction with Kodiak and was about to witness the bear management process for the first time. But as they neared the entrance, Frank noticed a maintenance panel ajar, its bolts loosened, likely overlooked by a careless worker. Unease gripped him as he realized the danger. This panel provided access to a service gate, the only barrier between Kodiak and freedom. In an instant, Kodiak sensed the opportunity. Frank's heart raced as he watched the bear grip the loose gate with its powerful paw and tug it open. Before either man could react, Kodiak slipped through, emerging into the zoo's public area. Panic erupted as the first visitors spotted the massive bear. Screams filled the air, and chaos ensued as people scattered in all directions, fleeing from the predator now roaming freely. Frank's heart pounded in his chest as he assessed the situation. This was no longer about preventing an escape. It was now a race to stop a catastrophe. Kodiak, disoriented by the sudden freedom, was unpredictable and dangerous. Frank knew what the bear was capable of, and with frightened visitors running chaotically, the potential for disaster was immense. Sam, his voice trembling, pointed to a tranquilizer gun mounted on a nearby wall. Frank shook his head, knowing it wasn't a quick fix. The tranquilizers would take too long to subdue an animal of Kodiak's size, and firing in a crowded area could only make the situation worse. This would have to be handled up close, carefully, and with precision. Frank's mind raced as he tried to formulate a plan. He knew Kodiak's habits. If they could guide him back toward the enclosure, they might have a chance. But Sam had other ideas. The rookie's impulse was to chase the bear, attempting to corner it using vehicles and barriers. Frank, though, knew that chasing Kodiak would only escalate the bear's aggression. As Sam darted off to execute his plan, Frank felt a surge of frustration. The young keeper's inexperience was driving him into dangerous decisions. Frank stayed back, using his knowledge of Kodiak to keep the bear in sight but at a safe distance, hoping to steer the massive creature without provoking a confrontation. However, Sam's risky approach quickly backfired. A group of zoo workers attempted to block Kodiak's path using a small utility vehicle. The bear, feeling trapped, reacted with terrifying speed. With a guttural roar, he charged the car, flipping it effortlessly. The workers fled, leaving the vehicle a crumpled heap. Kodiak, now agitated, reared up on his hind legs, towering over the scene, his claws slashing at the air. Frank knew they were losing control. Kodiak's aggression was escalating rapidly, and if they didn't intervene quickly, someone would be seriously hurt or worse. He abandoned his cautious distance and moved in closer, heart pounding, knowing this was a critical moment. Kodiak turned toward a cluster of fleeing visitors. Frank could see the fear in their faces, and his instincts took over. With no other options, he grabbed a metal rod from a nearby supply shed and waved it in the air, making himself as large and intimidating as possible. Kodiak's attention shifted, his beady eyes locking onto Frank. It was a calculated risk. Frank knew the bear recognized him, but no guarantee would stop an attack. For a moment, Kodiak hesitated. The bear, now only a few yards away, growled deeply, his massive paws leaving gouges in the earth as he tested Frank's resolve. The air between them was thick with tension, each second dragging on for what felt like an eternity. Frank stood his ground, unflinching as Kodiak sized him up. But the standoff couldn't last forever. Suddenly, Kodiak lunged forward, the ground shaking under his weight. Frank reacted, sidestepping the bear's charge just in time, the massive paw swiping inches from his body. The rod in Frank's hand was useless against the sheer power of the bear's movements. All he could do now was stay alive long enough for help to arrive. The bear wheeled around quicker than Frank had expected, and this time, there was no avoiding the collision. Kodiak struck with brutal force, sending Frank sprawling to the ground. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs, but Frank managed to roll out of the way as Kodiak's claws came down again, gouging the dirt where Frank had just been. Desperation surged through Frank. He couldn't outrun the bear, and he certainly couldn't overpower it. But he could still outthink it. He grabbed a nearby bucket of fish meant for the polar bears and hurled it toward Kodiak. The sudden smell of food caught the bear's attention, and for a moment, Kodiak was distracted. It was all Frank needed. With adrenaline surging through him, Frank scrambled to his feet and used the few precious seconds to lead Kodiak back toward the enclosure. The bear followed, now more interested in the fish than the chaos around him. Frank's heart raced as they neared the gate, the plan coming together. As Kodiak entered the enclosure, Frank slammed the gate shut behind him, securing the bolts in place. He leaned against the fence, gasping for breath, his body trembling from the exertion and fear. As the sun began its descent on July 8, 2024, the Komarov family ventured into the heart of the Siberian wilderness. The day was warm, and the forest teemed with the hum of insects and the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. For Igor Komarov and his family, this trip was an escape from their hectic lives, a chance to reconnect with nature. Igor, a sturdy man in his late 40s with rugged strength, had long dreamed of showing his children the untouched beauty of Russia's wilds. His wife Alina, a quiet but resilient schoolteacher, shared his enthusiasm. Their children, 12-year-old Victor and 10-year-old Anya, were brimming with curiosity and excitement for the adventure. The journey to their campsite had been long and arduous, involving treks through dense forest and across winding rivers. They finally arrived at a secluded clearing surrounded by towering pines, offering a breathtaking view of distant mountains. There were no signs of civilization, just the Komarovs and the vast Siberian wilderness. As they set up camp, the children gathered firewood and explored their surroundings under their parents' watchful eyes. The crisp, fresh air was filled with the scent of pine needles and the earthy aroma of the forest floor. Igor, skilled in outdoor survival, built a fire pit, while Alina unpacked provisions, spreading bread, cheese, and cured meats on a blanket. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the clearing, the family settled down for dinner. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks into the cool evening air. The aroma of cooking meat mingled with the forest's scents, carried away on the breeze. Unbeknownst to the Komarovs, a massive grizzly bear in the distance had picked up the scent of their meal. This creature, perfectly adapted to its harsh environment, was driven by a relentless hunger. It moved silently through the underbrush, its dark fur blending with the forest floor. The bear's acute senses allowed it to detect the faint sounds of laughter and see the flickering firelight between the trees. With each step, it drew closer. The Komarovs, oblivious to the danger, continued their meal as the light faded and the forest grew quieter. The usual sounds of wildlife diminished as nocturnal creatures began to stir. The fire's glow created a small island of warmth and comfort in the encroaching darkness. The bear was now so close it could smell the sweat on their skin and the faint hint of fear. It paused at the edge of the clearing, its eyes gleaming in the firelight as it observed the family with a predatory intelligence. Then, with a burst of speed that belied its size, the bear charged forward, crashing through the underbrush. The attack was sudden and ferocious. The bear lunged into the clearing, a force of nature that shattered the calm. The Komarovs had mere seconds to react. Igor, nearest the fire, was the first to recognize the danger. His heart raced as he turned, realizing the gravity of the situation. In that critical moment, his thoughts were consumed with protecting his family. As the bear closed in, chaos erupted. The once serene evening was now a tumult of primal fear and desperate action. The family scrambled to react, their evening of relaxation turning into a fight for survival against a relentless predator. Instinctively, Igor grabbed a burning log from the fire, brandishing it like a weapon. The bear, undeterred, met his defiance with a roar that shook the very trees. It swiped at him with a paw the size of a dinner plate. Claws extended, the blow connected with Igor's chest, sending him sprawling backward with air driven from his lungs. Pain exploded through his body, but there was no time to dwell on it. He had to fight. Alina screamed a sound that echoed in the vast emptiness around them as she tried to shield the children. But the bear was relentless, its hunger and fury driving it to tear into anything that moved. Igor struggled to his feet, ignoring the blood that soaked his shirt, and swung the burning log at the bear's face. The flames licked at its fur, singeing the tips, but the bear barely flinched. Instead, it reared up on its hind legs, towering over Igor, and brought both of its massive paws down with a force that could shatter bone. Igor collapsed under the blow, the log falling from his hands as he crumpled to the ground. The bear turned its attention to Alina and the children, who were frozen in place, their eyes wide with terror. For a brief moment, the clearing was filled with a terrible silence, the kind that precedes an inescapable doom. Then the bear attacked again, its primal instincts taking over as it closed in on the remaining members of the Komarov family. Alina tried to shield her children, using her body as a barrier between them and the beast. But the bear was unstoppable, its jaws snapping at anything within reach. It struck Alina with a force that sent her tumbling to the ground, her body limp as she hit the earth. Victor and Anya, too young to comprehend the full horror of what was happening, could do nothing but watch as the bear's rage was unleashed upon them. The animal's immense power was overwhelming, and in mere minutes the lives of the Komarov family were extinguished in a flurry of violence and blood. The bear, hunger-sated, dragged the bodies into the forest, leaving the once serene campsite a scene of unimaginable carnage. The fire continued to burn, casting flickering shadows on the trees as if the forest itself mourned the loss of the lives it had claimed. When local hunters arrived the next day, they were met with a profound silence. The clearing, once alive with the sounds of a family and nature, was now a grim tableau of death. The brutal remains of the Komarovs were scattered, torn apart by the bear's ferocity, and the ground was stained with blood. The hunters, seasoned in the wild's harsh realities, followed the bloodied trail more into the forest, their faces etched with grim determination. Knowing the bear, having tasted human flesh, would now be more dangerous, they proceeded cautiously. They eventually found the bear resting in a thicket, its bloodied fur marking its recent violence. The immense beast, with eyes reflecting primal intelligence, was a formidable threat. With heavy hearts, the hunters ended the bear's life, eliminating the danger it posed. News of the Komarov family's tragic end quickly spread, shaking the region. The incident underscored the lethal risks of remote wilderness, highlighting Siberia's brutal reality, where only the strong survive, and even then, survival is never assured. In December 2015, deep in the heart of Alaska's rugged interior, the Miller family was preparing for another harsh winter. The Millers had lived on their homestead near the small town of Tok for over a decade. Their life was one of self-sufficiency, built on the principles of hard work and a deep connection to the land. The family consisted of John and Sarah Miller, along with their two children, Emily and Jake. They had chosen this remote life for its simplicity and the opportunity to raise their children close to nature. Their homestead was a modest but sturdy log cabin surrounded by dense forests and vast wilderness. The Millers raised livestock, including chickens and goats, which provided them with eggs, milk, and meat. They also tended a small vegetable garden that helped sustain them through the long, cold months. Life in the Alaskan interior was challenging, with long winters and the constant need to be vigilant against the elements and the wildlife that shared their land. John, a former park ranger, was well aware of the dangers that came with living in such a remote area. He had instilled in his family a respect for the wilderness and the animals that inhabited it. The Millers were always careful to store their food securely, knowing that the scent could attract predators. Bears, in particular, were a constant concern, especially in the fall when they were preparing for hibernation and more likely to venture closer to human settlements in search of food. As December wore on, the days grew shorter and the temperatures began to drop. The family spent most of their time preparing for winter, gathering firewood, preserving food, and reinforcing their cabin against the coming snow. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John noticed something unusual. The frantic clucking of their chickens disrupted the normally peaceful atmosphere of their homestead. He stepped outside to investigate, only to find that a grizzly bear had wandered onto their property. The bear, driven by hunger, had broken into the chicken coop and was attacking the livestock. John's heart raced as he watched the powerful animal wreak havoc on their carefully maintained farm. He knew that bears were incredibly dangerous, especially when they were desperate for food. John quickly ran back inside to grab his rifle, hoping to scare the bear away before it could do more damage. Despite his efforts, the bear was undeterred. The smell of livestock and stored food had drawn it too close to the homestead, and it was not willing to leave empty-handed. John fired a warning shot into the air, but the sound only seemed to agitate the bear further. It left the chicken coop and began to move towards the cabin, its powerful body crashing through the underbrush as it advanced. Realizing that their home was now in danger, John and Sarah quickly brought the children inside, securing the doors and windows as best as they could. The bear, now more aggressive, began to claw at the cabin, its massive paws leaving deep gouges in the wood. The family was trapped inside, terrified as the bear continued its assault on their home. The once peaceful homestead had turned into a scene of chaos, and the Millers knew they were in for the fight of their lives. The bear's relentless assault on the cabin continued as the Millers huddled together inside, their fear growing with each powerful strike. John, knowing that the thin wooden walls of their home would not hold for much longer, realized they had to act quickly. He grabbed his rifle once more, hoping that, this time, a direct shot might be enough to drive the bear away. With a steady hand, he aimed through a small gap in the door and fired a shot at the bear. The bullet hit its mark, grazing the bear's shoulder. The grizzly let out a roar of pain and anger, but instead of retreating, it became even more aggressive, slamming its massive body against the cabin door. The force of the impact splintered the wood, and the door began to buckle under the pressure. In a desperate attempt to protect his family, John grabbed a metal pot from the kitchen and started banging it against the walls, trying to create as much noise as possible. The loud clanging, combined with the pain from the gunshot, finally caused the bear to pause. It hesitated for a moment, then slowly began to back away from the cabin. The bear, now more wary, turned and lumbered back into the forest, leaving the Millers shaken but alive. The family remained inside for hours, too afraid to move until they were sure the bear was gone. When they finally emerged, they saw the extent of the damage. The chicken coop was destroyed, and several of their livestock were either dead or missing. The cabin itself bore deep scars from the bear's claws, a grim reminder of how close they had come to disaster. John's injuries from the encounter were severe. His arm and shoulder, strained from the rifle's recoil and the struggle to defend his home, required medical attention. Sarah quickly dressed his wounds as best she could before they made the long journey to the nearest town, Tok, where John could receive proper treatment. At the small clinic in Tok, the local doctor treated John's injuries, commending him for his bravery in protecting his family. However, the attack left more than just physical wounds. The psychological impact on the entire family was profound. The Millers returned to their homestead with a new understanding of the dangers that living in such a remote area entailed. The attack sparked a broader conversation in the local community about the growing tension between human settlements and wildlife in Alaska's wilderness. Neighbors began discussing ways to improve safety measures, and some even considered relocating to more secure areas. The Millers' ordeal became a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of the wild and the ongoing challenge of coexisting with the powerful creatures that also called Alaska home. The Wilson family had planned this camping trip in the Adirondacks for months. Mark and Sarah, along with their two young children, Emma and Jacob, had spent countless hours preparing, eager to escape the noise and rush of their suburban lives for a few days in the crisp, quiet wilderness. It was late October, and the Adirondacks were bathed in the golden hues of autumn, with leaves crunching underfoot and the scent of pine and earth thick in the air. For the children, this was an adventure. A weekend of campfires, marshmallows, and sleeping under the stars. Their campsite sat nestled among the towering trees, miles away from the nearest ranger station. The remoteness added to the allure, but it also meant they were on their own if anything went wrong. Still, Mark had always considered himself well-versed in camping. He was confident in their safety, especially after setting up their tent at a distance from where they'd store their food and cook their meals. They had read all the pamphlets about wildlife, and Mark had assured Sarah they'd be fine as long as they followed the rules about food storage. But the Adirondacks were home to creatures that operated under different rules, creatures driven by the unrelenting need to survive, especially as winter loomed. The black bears, normally elusive and uninterested in humans, were in a frenzy of feeding, fattening themselves up for hibernation. Even a whiff of poorly stored food could become an irresistible draw. That afternoon they thoroughly enjoyed themselves. The kids had run through the forest, climbing rocks and collecting leaves, their laughter echoing off the hills. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the air turned colder, Mark lit the campfire, and they roasted hot dogs and marshmallows. The children, exhausted but happy, curled up in their sleeping bags early. Mark and Sarah stayed by the fire a little longer, enjoying the peace that only the wilderness could provide. What Mark didn't realize, however, was that earlier in the day, when he hastily packed away the remnants of lunch, he had left traces of food near the tent, a smear of peanut butter here, a wrapper there. To him, it seemed insignificant, but to a bear preparing for hibernation, it was enough. The first sign of trouble came just after dusk. There was a rustling in the distance, a sound too large to be a raccoon or deer. Mark, standing at the edge of the firelight, peered into the darkness. It was probably nothing, he thought, though a chill of unease settled over him. He dismissed it, returning to the fire and stoking it higher, hoping to ward off the biting cold. Later, as the family settled into their tent for the night, a soft grunt echoed through the trees. It was low and distant, but unmistakable to anyone familiar with the Adirondacks. Sarah's hand tightened on Mark's arm. A black bear. Likely just passing through, he assured himself, though his mind raced. Black bears were generally timid, but it was late in the season, and this one might be more aggressive, desperate to find enough calories to survive the coming months. The snapping of twigs grew louder as the bear drew near to their camp. Mark, heart pounding, slipped on his boots and grabbed a flashlight. Bears were usually scared off by noise or bright lights, but as he stepped outside the tent and shone the beam into the dark forest, he saw nothing. The silence was unnerving, but Mark knew the bear was close. It had picked up the scent of their food. Hidden in the shadows, the bear, a large male over 300 pounds, circled the campsite with eerie stealth. It had already begun to lose its natural caution, drawn by the promise of an easy meal. Suddenly there was a loud crash. The bear had found the food storage, knocking over the cooler. Mark cursed under his breath. Grabbing the air horn from the emergency kit, he blasted it into the night. The bear hesitated briefly, its ears flicking in irritation, but it didn't leave. It was hungry, and fear had given way to determination. The bear loomed just beyond the firelight, a massive dark figure barely visible against the trees. Inside the tent, Sarah clutched their children, Emma and Jacob, trying to calm them while her panic surged. She could hear the bear pawing at their supplies. Mark hurled rocks at the beast, hoping to drive it off, but the bear was undeterred. Its patience was growing thin, and Mark realized the real danger wasn't just in the food. It was in the bear's persistence. Hours passed in tense silence as the bear stalked the campsite, returning after every scare tactic. Mark kept the fire high, praying it would be enough to keep the bear at bay. At one point, the bear brushed against the tent, its massive body pressing against the thin fabric. Inside, Sarah could hear its heavy breathing, just inches from her children. As the night dragged on, Mark's mind raced. Could they run to the car? No, it was too risky. They were miles from help, and escape in the dark was impossible. Their only option was to wait for the morning, hoping the bear would finally retreat. Just as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, a sharp snap echoed through the woods. The bear, startled by the awakening forest, finally turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving the family shaken but alive. February 2019, Dr. Emily Carter and her team of 4 others were working at a research facility in Svalbard, Norway. They were glaciologists, studying Svalbard's glaciers and other ice formations. The researchers were passionate enough about their job to withstand Svalbard's biting cold. The frigid, sharp cold seemed to cut through even the thickest of their thermal gear. But Emily and her team were undeterred. Their mission was too important. They were gathering data on the thinning ice, hoping to better understand climate patterns in the Arctic region. That day, Dr. Emily Carter and her team woke up early. They left the safety of their research facility to go out on the ice and make some measurements. The icy expanse of Svalbard was breathtaking. The air was frosty. The ice was blinding. It was a majestic kind of beauty, something not everyone gets to see in this lifetime. But there was also cause for concern. It seemed that the ice was thinning faster than the team had anticipated. How would this impact the sea levels? The team worked as the hours flew by. Soon enough, the sun began its slow descent. It was getting late. Dr. Emily Carter knew they had to wrap things up and return to base. With its impressive population of polar bears, Svalbard can be a dangerous place, especially in the dark. They'd be out on the ice again tomorrow morning anyway. There was no need to take unnecessary risks. The team started gathering their instruments. The samples and the expensive equipment had to be handled very carefully. The equipment was expensive, while the samples were the result of a long day of work. Unbeknownst to them, danger lurked just beyond their perimeter. A polar bear had been stalking them for a while. The bear's hunting grounds had been shrinking year by year, the ice retreating further each year, leaving it with fewer opportunities to hunt for seals. The bear was thinner than it should have been, and it was hungry. The animal moved silently, its white fur concealed by the ice and the falling darkness. It paused for a short while, sniffing the air, before creeping closer, drawn by the scent of food and humans. But the researchers were too busy packing up. They remained blissfully unaware of the approaching threat, too engrossed in their work. It was Dr. Lucas Anderson, the team's youngest member, that first noticed the bear. He had finished packing and walked a few steps away from his team, wanting to take a picture of the icy expanse. That's when he saw it, a massive white figure moving steadily toward them. His breath caught in her throat, and for a moment he was paralyzed by fear. He screamed. Lucas's voice pierced the stillness as he let the other know about the animal. In hindsight, screaming wasn't exactly the best course of action. It angered the bear, and to make things worse, panic erupted in the camp. Researchers scrambled, grabbing whatever they could find to defend themselves. Emily, heart pounding, reached for the flare gun they had been issued as a safety precaution. Her hands were shaking badly. The bear, now fully aware of its discovery, broke into a lumbering run. It was terrifyingly fast for such a large creature, closing the distance between itself and the researchers with alarming speed. As the bear ran at full speed toward her, Dr. Vanessa Gage, the team's geologist, remembered an old saying about bears. If it's brown, lay down. If it's black, fight back. If it's white, good night, the saying goes. A sudden, terrible realization overcame Vanessa. She knew there was no way she could survive a polar bear attack. Still, instinct overrode fear. She turned to run, but the bear was upon her in seconds. With a powerful swipe of its paw, the bear knocked Vanessa to the ground. She cried out in pain as the claws tore through her thick jacket, leaving deep gashes in her back. The camp was filled with screams and shouts as the researchers tried to come to Vanessa's aid. Dr. Emily Carter knew she had to act. She had to save her colleague, or at least try to do so. Emily fired the flare gun at the bear. More startled by the sudden burst of light and noise than injured, the bear stopped its attack. In the meantime, two other researchers, Lucas and Sarah, seized the opportunity and grabbed metal poles from their equipment, waving them and shouting in an attempt to drive the bear away. The bear growled deeply, but it was already in a weakened state. The team almost couldn't believe their eyes when the animal backed away, snarling before turning and lumbering off into the darkness. As the bear disappeared, the team rushed to Vanessa's side. She was badly injured, blood staining the snow around her. Emily quickly assessed Vanessa's wounds, using their limited medical supplies to stem the bleeding and stabilize her as best she could. They needed to get Vanessa to a hospital as soon as possible. They improvised a makeshift gurney and carried her to their research facility. Luckily, no other animal bothered them. There, they called for help. Help arrived soon after, and Dr. Vanessa Gage was transported to a hospital. Her injuries were severe, but the doctors were hopeful about her outcome. Back at the research facility, the team knew they had to revise safety protocols. They were aware that the ordeal could have been much worse. The incident underscored the immediate dangers posed by climate change, not just to the environment, but to those studying it. The team decided to double the safety measures, that everyone was equipped with flare guns, and that a watch was kept at all times. They had to continue working. Vanessa Gage made a full recovery. The incident didn't stop her from returning to the ice, but her scars told the stories of that one dreadful evening. Rachel, drawn to the wild, had always found solace in the Sierra Nevada mountains with their rugged peaks and shadowy valleys. The allure of solitude and the challenge of navigating this terrain had long captivated her. Well prepared and experienced, she had meticulously studied maps, learned trails, and readied herself for any scenario. On this particular morning, the sky was a brilliant, endless blue. Rachel chose a remote trail she had hiked before, winding through thick pine forests and beside crystal-clear lakes where solitude reigned and only nature's sounds were present. As she walked, Rachel remained vigilant, aware of the wildlife that inhabited the Sierra Nevada. Armed with bear spray, a whistle, and a knife, she followed safety protocols to avoid startling a bear. The day was uneventful until she entered a shaded stretch and spotted a large black bear about 20 yards away. The bear, moving slowly, seemed unaware of her presence. Rachel froze and reached for her bear spray, her hand trembling. Unlike previous encounters, this bear did not retreat, but instead locked eyes with her, signaling a potentially dangerous situation. The bear's eyes were dark and unblinking. Rachel felt a surge of adrenaline as the bear took a step toward her. She tried to remember her training. Stay calm, don't run, make yourself look more prominent. But the bear wasn't following the usual script. It didn't pause, didn't hesitate. It kept coming, a low, menacing growl rumbling from deep within its chest. Rachel slowly began to back away, her heart pounding in her ears. The bear followed, its massive paws crunching on the forest floor. She raised her arms, trying to appear larger, trying to dissuade the bear from advancing, but the bear's demeanor had shifted. There was no fear, no curiosity, only aggression. She fumbled with the bear spray, her fingers clumsy with fear. The bear was close now. Too close. Rachel knew she was in grave danger. She aimed the spray and squeezed the trigger, releasing a cloud of fiery mist directly into the bear's face. The bear recoiled, shaking its head and snorting. For a brief moment, Rachel thought she had succeeded. The bear staggered back, pawing at its face. But the relief was short-lived. The bear, enraged by the burning in its eyes and nose, let out a roar and charged. Rachel barely had time to react. The bear barreled into her with the force of a freight train, knocking her off her feet. She hit the ground hard, the wind driven from her lungs in a painful rush. The bear was on her in an instant, its massive weight pinning her down. Rachel fought with everything she had. She kicked and thrashed, trying to push the bear off of her. She could feel the bear's hot breath on her face and smell the musky scent of its fur. The bear's claws raked across her chest, tearing through her jacket and into her flesh. She screamed in pain, a raw, primal sound that echoed through the trees. The bear's jaws closed around her arm, its teeth sinking deep into her flesh. She tried to pull free, but the bear's grip was like a vice, unrelenting and merciless. Every instinct in Rachel's body screamed at her to fight, to survive. She swung her free arm at the bear, hitting it with weak, desperate blows. She reached for the knife at her side, her fingers slick with blood as she fumbled to pull it from its sheath. The bear shook its head, tearing into her arm, and Rachel's vision blurred with the pain. With a final surge of strength, she managed to draw the knife. She stabbed at the bear's side, driving the blade into its thick hide. The bear roared, a sound of fury and pain. It reared back, releasing her arm, and Rachel seized the opportunity. She tried to crawl away, dragging herself across the ground, but her body was broken, her strength sapped. The bear lunged at Rachel, knocking her to the ground with a powerful swipe. Dazed, she saw the bear's massive form blotting out the sky, its bloodied muzzle dripping with her blood. Realizing her fate, Rachel fought with a knife, but her strikes were ineffective. The bear casually knocked the knife from her hand and clamped its jaws around her neck. The excruciating pain overwhelmed her, and darkness began to close in as her heart pounded fiercely. As the bear's grip tightened, Rachel's thoughts turned to her family, the mountains she loved, and the countless times she had walked these trails. Then, everything faded away. Later that day, other hikers found Rachel's body, having heard the struggle and the bear's roars, but arriving too late. The community was shocked by the tragedy, mourning the loss of a seasoned hiker. Authorities set up patrols and issued warnings, ultimately tracking and euthanizing the bear for public safety. Rachel's death was a sad reminder of the wild's unpredictable danger. In the early hours of July 7, 2024, in the quiet rural outskirts of Talkeetna, Alaska, a small chicken farmer named Henry Thompson prepared for another day of tending to his farm. Henry, a lifelong resident of this remote part of Alaska, had built a modest but thriving life with his chickens, which provided eggs and meat for the local community. His farm, surrounded by dense forests and the towering peaks of the Alaska Range, was both beautiful and isolated. The rugged wilderness that drew Henry to this life also brought with it the ever-present risks of living so close to nature. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft golden light over the farm as Henry stepped out of his small cabin. The air was crisp, and the morning was peaceful, with only the sounds of birds chirping and the distant rustle of leaves in the breeze. Henry's farm was modest, with a few outbuildings, a vegetable garden, and a large chicken coop where he kept his prized flock. The coop, built sturdy to keep out smaller predators like foxes and raccoons, had always been enough to protect his chickens. As Henry walked toward the coop, he noticed something unusual. The door, which he always secured carefully, was slightly ajar. His heart skipped a beat as he quickened his pace, a growing sense of unease settling in. As he approached, the scene before him confirmed his worst fears. The coop had been breached. Feathers were scattered across the ground, and the wire mesh was torn in places. The sight of his once peaceful farm in disarray sent a wave of panic through him. Unbeknownst to Henry, a grizzly bear had wandered onto his property during the night. Attracted by the scent of chickens, the bear had broken into the coop, searching for an easy meal. Grizzly bears are powerful and intelligent animals, capable of breaking through barriers when driven by hunger. The bear, finding the coop full of potential food, had caused the destruction that now lay before Henry. As Henry stepped closer to inspect the damage, he was unaware that the bear was still nearby, hidden in the dense underbrush surrounding the farm. The bear, startled by Henry's sudden presence, perceived him as a threat. Instinct took over, and the bear charged at Henry with incredible speed. The distance between them closed in an instant, and before Henry could react, the bear was upon him. The bear's attack was swift and brutal. With a powerful swipe of its massive paw, the bear knocked Henry to the ground. The farmer, despite his years of experience with the dangers of the Alaskan wilderness, was no match for the grizzly's strength. The bear mauled Henry, inflicting life-threatening injuries before retreating back into the woods, leaving the farm eerily silent once more. Henry lay motionless on the ground, the early morning light casting long shadows over his battered body. The bear had retreated into the dense woods, leaving the farm in a state of haunting silence. It was only by sheer luck that a neighbor, passing by on his way to town, noticed the unusual stillness on Henry's property. Concerned, he stopped to check on his friend and quickly realized the gravity of the situation. Seeing Henry's condition, the neighbor acted quickly. He called for emergency services while doing his best to stabilize Henry, who was barely conscious and losing blood rapidly. The minutes felt like hours as they waited for help to arrive. The remote location of the farm meant that it took some time for paramedics to reach them, but their training and speed were crucial in those first critical moments. When the paramedics arrived, they worked swiftly to assess Henry's severe injuries. His body bore deep wounds and gashes from the bear's powerful claws. The medics knew that getting him to a hospital was the only chance for survival. They carefully loaded him into the ambulance and began the long journey to the nearest hospital in Anchorage, the largest city in Alaska, where specialized care could be provided. At the hospital, the emergency team was prepared for the worst. Henry was rushed into surgery, where doctors worked tirelessly to stop the bleeding and repair the extensive damage caused by the bear. The operation was long and complicated, with surgeons battling to save his life. The staff at the hospital, accustomed to treating injuries from outdoor activities, were still shaken by the severity of Henry's condition. As Henry recovered in the intensive care unit, the news of the attack spread quickly through the local farming community. The reality of living alongside wildlife in such a remote area had always been understood, but this attack brought those dangers into sharp focus. Farmers and residents alike began discussing the need for more robust safety measures and the importance of being constantly vigilant. In the aftermath of the attack, local authorities and wildlife experts held meetings with the community, emphasizing the risks of attracting bears to farms and homes. Advice on securing livestock, proper food storage, and the importance of bear deterrence was reinforced. The community, though tight-knit and resilient, was deeply affected by what had happened to Henry. Henry's road to recovery was long and painful. He endured multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation, both physical and emotional. The once quiet life on his farm would never be the same. The incident served as a sobering reminder of the unpredictable and often dangerous relationship between humans and the wild. Henry's story became a symbol of the delicate balance between living off the land and respecting the powerful forces of nature that share it. The cold dawn light filtered through the tall pines of Banff National Park, casting long shadows over the dense underbrush. The crisp air carried the fresh scent of pine needles and the lingering chill of the night. Levi and Arnold, part of a small group of campers, had risen early, eager for a day of hiking in the Canadian Rockies. After arriving at their campsite the previous evening and enjoying a night of laughter around the fire, They had retired to their tents, lulled by the wilderness sounds. The campsite, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering peaks, offered stunning views and easy access to popular trails. It was a serene spot that promised adventure and a break from daily life. As the sun rose, the campsite was peaceful, with only the rustling of leaves and occasional bird calls breaking the silence. The campers, still groggy, prepared breakfast and discussed their plans for the day. The aroma of coffee and frying bacon mingled with the earthy scent of the forest, creating a tranquil morning. However, amid this calm, a mistake had been made. In their excitement, the group had neglected food storage guidelines. A half-eaten sandwich and snacks were left on a picnic table. They had planned to address it in the morning, but they did not fully grasp the potential consequences of their oversight. The scent of the food drifted through the forest, attracting a grizzly bear, a powerful predator roaming Banff National Park. This grizzly, with a thick brown coat and rippling muscles, was drawn by the promise of an easy meal. Experienced in scavenging human campsites, it was quick to seize opportunities. In the early morning hours, while the campers were still asleep, the grizzly approached the campsite. Moving silently through the forest, the bear's heightened senses guided it toward the source of the enticing aroma. As it emerged from the trees and approached the campsite, its eyes fixed on the unattended food, a primal response ignited. The bear's pace quickened as it crossed the open ground, its breath visible in the cool air. The campers, focused on their morning routines, remained unaware of the approaching danger. It wasn't until one of them stepped out of his tent and spotted the bear that fear jolted through the group. Levi, who the fire pit had crouched, looked up just in time to see the grizzly bear emerge fully into the clearing. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment he was frozen in place, his mind struggling to process the sight before him. The bear was immense, its size even more imposing up close, and its presence was utterly terrifying. The animal's eyes gleamed with a mix of curiosity and hunger as it sniffed the air, its gaze locking onto the unattended food on the table. Panic began to ripple through the group as the campers realized the gravity of the situation. Arnold, who had been gathering firewood a short distance away, dropped his bundle and rushed back toward the others. He too felt the cold grip of fear as he saw the bear advancing on their campsite. The grizzly, sensing the rising tension, paused for a moment, its ears twitching as it gauged the humans' reactions. Levi and Arnold exchanged a glance, their unspoken understanding clear. They needed to scare the bear away. It was a desperate plan, born of the instinct to protect their friends and themselves, but it was also one fraught with danger. They knew the risks of confronting a grizzly, especially one that had already identified a food source. Yet the alternative, doing nothing and allowing the bear to rummage through their campsite, seemed just as dangerous. Levi, summoning all the courage he could muster, grabbed a large branch from the ground. He knew that bears could be intimidated by loud noises and aggressive posturing, but he also knew that it was far from a guaranteed deterrent. Arnold, following Levi's lead, picked up a metal pot and began banging it loudly, hoping to startle the bear into retreat. The grizzly, however, was not easily intimidated. It had encountered humans before and was familiar with their attempts to scare it off. Instead of retreating, the bear let out a deep, resonant growl, a sound that reverberated through the campsite like a thunderclap. The campers froze, their makeshift weapons suddenly feeling woefully inadequate in the face of such raw power. Without warning, the bear charged. The grizzly closed the gap with terrifying speed. Levi, standing closest, barely had time to react before the bear was on him. He swung a branch in a desperate defense, but the bear effortlessly batted it away. The force sent Levi crashing to the ground, pain searing through his chest as the bear's claws raked across him. His vision darkened as the bear loomed overhead. Arnold, seeing Levi's peril, rushed to help, wielding a metal pot. But the bear, fully committed, turned on Arnold with lightning speed. It bit down on his arm, the pain excruciating and fiery. The bear shook Arnold violently, dragging him to the ground. Despite Arnold's desperate kicks and strikes, the bear's immense strength overpowered him. Levi, though badly injured, pushed himself to his knees, his vision blurred. He grabbed a rock and hurled it at the bear. The rock struck the grizzly's face, causing it to release Arnold momentarily. The brief distraction gave Arnold a chance to scramble away, clutching his wounded arm to his chest. Blood oozed from the deep gashes where the bear's teeth had sunk into his flesh, and he could feel the strength draining from his body with each passing second. but the instinct to survive was strong, and he forced himself to keep moving, knowing that to stop would mean certain death. The campers initially panicked, but they regrouped and tried to drive the bear away with noise. They grabbed sticks, rocks, and metal objects, creating a desperate symphony of survival. The grizzly hesitated, disoriented by the commotion. After a bone-chilling roar, it turned and lumbered back into the forest. In the aftermath, Levi lay on the ground, bloodied and gasping, while Arnold, barely conscious, was cradled with a makeshift tourniquet. Shock and horror were evident on the campers' faces. Despite their severe injuries, Levi and Arnold were still alive. The group quickly contacted park rangers and emergency services, who responded swiftly. Within an hour, a helicopter arrived, airlifting Levi and Arnold to the nearest hospital. Fog thickly blanketed the Alaskan village, muting sound and blurring the landscape. This small indigenous settlement, once ruled by ice, faced change as warming temperatures melted the sea ice. Yet today, the villagers gathered for a seasonal celebration, a brief moment of joy amid survival challenges. Families mingled, children played, and elders reflected quietly. The scent of food filled the cold air, symbolizing unity and tradition as they came together to honor their heritage and support one another in the shifting Arctic environment. Unbeknownst to them, something far more dangerous than any blizzard lurked beyond the edge of the fog. The polar bear, driven south by starvation, wandered in an increasingly unfamiliar environment. The sea ice, once the foundation of its hunting grounds, was disappearing, forcing it into closer proximity to human settlements. This particular bear had been stalking the periphery of the village for days, gaunt and desperate, its immense body weakened by hunger. It had smelled the food, sensed the warmth of life, and instinctively followed the scent through the fog. The bear's body was an embodiment of power, but power was diminished by need. Once thick and white, its fur clung to a skeletal frame, ribs visible beneath the matted fur. Yellowed eyes, filled with hunger and desperation, scanned the village from the shadows. The fog concealed its approach, as silent as the snow underfoot. It moved with a terrifying grace, its massive paws padding lightly as it neared the heart of the village. Suddenly, there was a shift. The bear stepped into the open, emerging from the mist like a phantom. At first, no one noticed. The gathering continued as children laughed and adults chatted. But then a gasp cut through the fog, and eyes turned toward the pale, hulking figure standing at the edge of the gathering. For a brief, surreal moment, the village was frozen, locked in a collective state of disbelief. It wasn't unusual to see polar bears in the Arctic, but never this close, never like this. The bear moved. It charged without warning, driven by an instinctual hunger that overpowered all caution. Its speed was shocking, belying its size and weakened condition. In an instant, the peaceful gathering turned into chaos. Screams erupted as the massive predator barreled forward, its powerful limbs propelling it toward the nearest group of villagers. A child, no older than 6, was caught in the bear's path. The predator's jaws, lined with dagger-like teeth, clamped down on the child's small frame with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed across the snow, staining the pure white landscape a gruesome red. The bear's attack was swift and ruthless. It flung the child's lifeless body aside as if it weighed nothing and moved on to the next victim. Panic spread through the crowd like wildfire. People scrambled in all directions, some toward their homes, others trying in vain to help those already in the bear's path. Elders, their movements slowed by age, became easy targets. One of the village elders, a respected woman known for her wisdom, was caught off guard as she tried to shield a younger family member. The bear's massive paw swiped across her body, claws raking through her flesh as if she were made of paper. She collapsed in a heap, her body twisted and broken, lifeblood soaking into the ground beneath her. Another villager, a man in his 30s, grabbed a shovel from a nearby stack of tools. His face was etched with fear and determination as he ran toward the bear, swinging the makeshift weapon with all his strength. The shovel connected with the bear's side, but the impact was nothing more than a glancing blow. Enraged, the bear turned on him, its maw open wide. The man barely had time to react before the bear's jaws closed around his leg. It pulled him down, ripping into his flesh with savage efficiency. His screams echoed in the air, cut short by the bear's relentless mauling. In just 2 minutes, the polar bear had already claimed multiple lives, and the carnage was far from over. It moved with terrifying speed from one target to the next, its primal instincts honed from a life of survival in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Even weakened by hunger, its sheer strength was overwhelming. The bear swiped at another villager, tearing through clothing and flesh as it sent the man flying backward, landing in a crumpled heap. A group of villagers, in a desperate bid to defend their community, gathered whatever they could find, shovels, hammers, even kitchen knives, and charged at the bear. Their fear was palpable, but so was their determination. The bear met them with equal ferocity. It reared up on its hind legs, towering over them, a giant of muscle and bone. One villager stabbed at its belly with a knife, but the blade barely penetrated the thick fur and skin. The bear roared in fury and brought its total weight down on him, crushing his body beneath its bulk. Those who remained tried to flee. Parents scooped up their children, running toward the safety of their homes, but the bear was relentless. It charged at another group, its jaws snapping at anything that moved. A young girl, separated from her family in the chaos, found herself in the bear's direct path. She tried to run, but the bear's claws caught her leg, dragging her down into the snow. Her cries were lost amidst the frenzy as the bear tore into her. As the attack raged on, the village's isolation became painfully evident. No emergency services were close enough to respond in time. The nearest outpost was hours away by helicopter, and even that would be delayed by the fog and weather conditions. The villagers were alone, left to face the beast with nothing but their own courage and meager tools. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Eventually, through a combination of sheer willpower and luck, the remaining villagers managed to drive the bear back. Several men, wielding axes and other tools, landed blows that slowed the bear down. Bloodied and exhausted, the bear finally retreated into the fog, limping and growling, but it had already left its mark on the village. The aftermath was harrowing. Bodies lay strewn across the snow, their blood staining the earth. The survivors, trembling and in shock, surveyed the carnage. 9 people had been killed, including children and elders, their lives snuffed out in the blink of an eye. The village, once a place of tight-knit community and tradition, was now a scene of unspeakable horror. The Anderson family had eagerly anticipated their mountain getaway, hoping to escape their hectic lives and reconnect with nature. John and Lisa, along with their children, Noah, 14, and Emily, 10, rented a secluded cabin deep in the wilderness. Nestled among towering pines and overlooking a pristine lake, it offered a perfect retreat. The remoteness provided a welcome change from city life. No cell service, no distractions, just the sounds of nature. The first few days unfolded beautifully. Long hikes, marshmallow roasting, and nights spent under a starlit sky. But on the third night, a strange stillness fell over the forest. John sensed something was off as they retreated into the cabin after an evening by the fire. The usual sounds of the woods faded, creating an unsettling silence. Though rustic, the cabin felt sturdy, constructed from thick logs and heavy beams, yet they hadn't fully prepared for the local black bears, notorious for scavenging human food. The park ranger had warned them, but John was confident they had secured their supplies. As the family settled into bed, a massive male bear began to circle the cabin, drawn in by the scent of their food. The faint scratching at the door went unnoticed until it intensified into a loud pounding. John jolted awake around midnight, initially dismissing it as a tree branch. But as the thuds grew louder, dread filled him. He jumped from the bed, heart racing, while Lisa stirred beside him, sensing his alarm. Cracking the door open, John was met with the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against wood and a massive shadow outside. The bear was at the front door, battering against it with powerful limbs. Panic surged as John realized they were trapped inside. The cabin was sturdy but not impenetrable. If the bear broke through, there would be no stopping it. He turned to Lisa, now fully awake, her eyes wide with fear. The kids were in the other room, vulnerable and unaware of the looming danger. Time was running out, and the bear was determined to get in. A loud crack echoed through the cabin as the doorframe splintered. The bear, driven by hunger and the scent of food, broke through with alarming speed. Its head and massive shoulders squeezed through the opening, and in the dim light of the cabin, its dark eyes gleamed with determination. John's instincts kicked in. He needed to reach the children. But the bear was now entirely inside the main room, and the lumbering animal blocked the hallway leading to the kids' bedroom. Lisa grabbed his arm, her face pale. He could feel her trembling. The bear began sniffing the air, drawn toward the kitchen where the family's food was stored. For a brief moment, it seemed to be the scent of food, which allowed John and Lisa time to think. But the car keys were in the kitchen, hanging on a hook just above the counter where they'd left a loaf of bread out earlier. Their only chance of escape was getting those keys and making it to the car, parked just outside. They were pinned. With the bear's bulk blocking the main room, John motioned for Lisa to stay put, as he frantically scanned the room for something, anything that could help them. His eyes landed on an old hunting rifle mounted on the wall. He darted across the room, but as he grabbed the gun, his stomach sank. No ammunition. The bear, having torn into a cabinet, sent pans crashing to the floor. It growled a low, deep sound that rattled the walls. Noah and Emily's room was on the opposite side of the cabin, and they were still trapped inside. John knew that if the bear became too aggressive, it could easily tear through the doors to reach them. He edged closer to the hallway, trying to remain out of the bear's line of sight. The animal was preoccupied with its focus on rummaging through the kitchen, but any sudden movement or sound could draw its attention. He made it halfway down the hall when the bear suddenly jerked its head up, its sharp ears picking up on the creaking of the floorboards. It sniffed the air again, turning toward the hallway. John froze, every muscle in his body tense. The bear moved slowly in his direction, its heavy steps echoing off the wooden floor. Lisa, still near the bedroom, looked on helplessly. The bear's massive body shifted its attention entirely toward John now. With no place to run, John backed toward the kids' room, hoping to shield them from the impending danger. In a split-second decision, John flung a chair across the room, hoping to divert the bear's attention. The chair crashed against the wall, causing the bear to snarl and charge toward the noise. It swiped at the air, its powerful claws tearing through the fabric of the furniture. In the chaos, John managed to reach Noah and Emily's room. He shoved the door open, pulling the kids from their beds. They were groggy, but quickly understood the severity of the situation. With the bear still distracted in the main room, John motioned for them to be silent. There was no time to think about a complete escape plan, only survival. Lisa, seizing the moment, grabbed the car keys while the bear tore through the remnants of the kitchen. With John leading the kids and Lisa trailing closely behind, they moved as quietly as possible through the back hallway toward the side door. Suddenly, the bear let out an ear-splitting roar. It had realized its human prey was trying to escape. It charged toward them, its claws scraping the floorboards, tearing through the house in a frantic rush. John shoved the side door open just in time. They all stumbled out into the cold night air, sprinting toward the car parked just a few feet away. The bear slammed into the door frame behind them, but by then, they were already inside the car. Lisa jammed the keys into the ignition, hands shaking uncontrollably as she started the engine. With a roar of the engine, they sped down the dirt road, leaving the cabin and the enraged bear behind in the darkness. As the cabin disappeared in the rearview mirror, they knew that they had narrowly escaped a brutal encounter, but the image of the bear breaking into their peaceful sanctuary would haunt them long after the mountain retreat was over. A group of tourists set out to explore the rugged and breathtaking landscapes of Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula, a region renowned for its dramatic volcanic scenery, vast wilderness, and diverse wildlife. The Kamchatka Peninsula, located in the far eastern part of Russia, is one of the most remote and unspoiled places on Earth. It is home to active volcanoes, hot springs, and an abundance of wildlife, including the majestic grizzly bear. The group of tourists, hailing from various countries, had come to witness the natural beauty of this unique region, drawn by the promise of adventure and the allure of the untamed wilderness. The group, led by experienced local guides, consisted of 10 people. Among them were John, a wildlife photographer from Canada, Maria and her husband Carlos, avid hikers from Spain, Sophie, a nature enthusiast from France, and several others who shared a passion for exploring the world's most remote and wild places. The tourists were eager to capture the stunning landscapes and diverse wildlife that Kamchatka had to offer. They were particularly excited about the opportunity to see grizzly bears in their natural habitat, aware that the peninsula is known for its dense bear population. On the morning of July 12th, the group set out early, trekking through the dense forests and volcanic terrain that characterize the peninsula. The weather was cool, with a light mist hanging in the air, adding an ethereal quality to the landscape. The guides led the way, taking the tourists along a well-known trail that followed a river teeming with salmon. This river was a favorite feeding ground for grizzly bears, who were often seen fishing for salmon during the summer months. As the group approached the river, the tourists began to take out their cameras, eager to capture the beauty of the surroundings. The sound of the rushing water and the distant call of birds filled the air, creating a peaceful atmosphere. The guides reminded the group to stay close and be vigilant, knowing that the area was a prime spot for bear activity. Despite the warnings, the excitement of the moment and the stunning scenery made it easy for the tourists to become absorbed in their photography. Unbeknownst to them, a grizzly bear was nearby, likely drawn to the river by the abundance of salmon. The bear, sensing the presence of the tourists, became agitated. Grizzlies are known to be highly territorial, especially when they feel their food source is threatened. The bear, hidden by the dense foliage, watched the group from a distance, its instincts telling it to defend its territory. Suddenly, the peaceful scene was shattered. Without warning, the grizzly bear charged at the group, its powerful body moving with alarming speed. The tourists, caught off guard, were thrown into a panic. The guides, well trained for such situations, quickly sprang into action, shouting for the group to retreat. The tourists scrambled to flee, their cameras and gear forgotten in the rush to escape. However, in the chaos, one man, John, was unable to get away in time. The bear, driven by its territorial instincts, caught up with him, knocking him to the ground with a forceful swipe of its massive paw. The other tourists could only watch in horror as the bear mauled him, its powerful jaws and claws inflicting serious injuries. The guides, witnessing the terrifying scene, knew they had to act quickly. They reached for their bear spray, a powerful deterrent that they always carried in these remote and dangerous regions. With steady hands, they sprayed the bear, aiming for its face. The bear, startled and blinded by the sudden burst of the potent mist, roared in frustration and backed away from John. The bear hesitated for a moment before retreating into the dense undergrowth, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. The group rushed to John's side, his injuries severe and his condition critical. The guides, trained in emergency first aid, immediately began treating him, doing their best to stop the bleeding and stabilize him. The tourists, who had just moments before been capturing the beauty of the Kamchatka Peninsula, were now grappling with the harsh reality of the wild. The atmosphere was tense, with everyone aware that they were still far from help and that John's life hung in the balance. With no time to waste, the guides quickly organized a makeshift stretcher from their equipment, knowing they needed to get John to medical attention as quickly as possible. The nearest town with medical facilities was Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, the capital of the Kamchatka Krai, but it was hours away. They began the arduous journey back, moving as fast as they could through the challenging terrain, all while keeping a vigilant eye on the surroundings in case the bear returned. The trek back to safety was grueling, but the group pushed forward, motivated by the urgent need to save John's life. After several exhausting hours, they finally reached the base camp, where they were able to radio for a helicopter evacuation. The helicopter arrived swiftly, and John was airlifted to the hospital in Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky. The medical team was prepared for his arrival, immediately taking him into surgery to treat his life-threatening injuries. The aftermath of the attack sent shockwaves through the local community and the broader world of adventure tourism. The incident highlighted the unpredictable dangers that exist in the wild, even for those who are experienced and well-prepared. It served as a stark reminder that the beauty of places like the Kamchatka Peninsula comes with inherent risks that must always be respected. John's recovery was long and difficult, requiring multiple surgeries and extensive rehabilitation. The experience left a lasting impact on all involved, particularly the tourists who had witnessed the attack firsthand. The event also led to renewed discussions about the importance of following safety protocols in bear country and the need for increased awareness among tourists about the potential dangers in such remote and wild areas. The Kamchatka Peninsula, while still a place of extraordinary beauty, now also carried the memory of this frightening encounter with one of nature's most powerful predators. Dr. Elena Rossi stood at the edge of the dense spruce forest, her breath steady but her heart racing. As a wildlife biologist with over a decade of experience studying bears, she was well acquainted with the challenges of the wilderness. Today, however, was different. Reports of an orphaned bear cub wandering near her research station had reached her, and the urgency to act was palpable. If she didn't intervene quickly, the cub would face starvation or predators. Equipped with her tranquilizer rifle and her expertise, Elena set off, her boots crunching on the forest floor as she searched for any signs of the cub. This area was known territory for a local mother bear and her offspring, but there was no sign of them. Time was critical, and the cub was alone and vulnerable. As she navigated the underbrush, the forest hummed with life. Birds chirped overhead and leaves rustled in the breeze. Then, through a break in the trees, she spotted it. The small cub lay curled near a fallen tree, weak and exposed. Its coat, typically thick and glossy, was matted, and it barely lifted its head as she approached. Elena's heart ached. This was the moment she had trained for countless times, yet it never got easier. Slowly kneeling, she readied her tranquilizer gun, intent on sedating the cub and bringing it back for care. Her movements were calm and precise as she adjusted the dart for the cub's small size, but just as she was about to aim, a deep, guttural growl echoed through the clearing. Every instinct in her body screamed danger. Elena froze, her heart racing. The growl intensified, and her blood ran cold as she turned her head. Emerging from the underbrush was the mother bear, massive and imposing, her dark fur gleaming in the sunlight. The bear sniffed the air, her dark eyes locking onto Elena and the cub. Elena's mind raced. The mother had been out of sight, likely foraging or patrolling her territory. But now, she saw Elena as a threat to her young. In an instant, the bear lunged forward with a deafening roar that shook the forest. Elena dropped the tranquilizer gun and scrambled backward, adrenaline surging. She recognized this wasn't a warning, it was a full-blown attack. The bear believed her cub was in danger. With no time to think, Elena threw herself to the side, narrowly avoiding a massive paw that swiped where she had just been. The bear was relentless. Panic surged in her, but she had to stay focused. She needed to create distance. Darting toward a cluster of trees, she relied on her understanding of bear behavior to navigate the terrain. Bears, though bulky, could sprint with surprising speed. The ground shook as the bear charged after her, its fury palpable. Elena's legs burned as she ran, branches whipping against her face and arms. She ducked behind a tree, hoping to buy herself some time. The bear skidded to a halt, sniffing the air, clearly agitated. Elena's heart raced as she formulated a plan. She needed to reach her research station, where safety awaited. But with the bear in pursuit, she had to act quickly. But then she tripped. Her foot caught on a root, sending her sprawling to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of her, but there was no time to recover. The bear was upon her, and Elena barely rolled out of the way as the bear struck, her claws tearing into the ground where Elena had been. Elena gasped in pain as she felt the bear's claws rake across her leg. White-hot agony shot through her body. She bit back a scream, knowing that any noise might further provoke the bear. Blood soaked her pants, but she couldn't stop now. Every second counted. The bear, enraged, reared up on her hind legs, towering over Elena. For a split second, Elena stared up at the beast, knowing how close she was to death. She managed to scramble to her feet, clutching her bleeding leg. With every ounce of strength she had left, she stumbled toward the nearest large tree. She had to put something solid between her and the bear. She could feel the animal's hot breath on her back as she threw herself behind the tree trunk, just as the bear slammed into it with a thunderous roar. The impact shook the tree, but it held. For a moment, there was a brief respite. Elena clung to the trunk, gasping for air, blood still pouring from her leg. The bear circled the tree, growling, her claws scraping the bark. Elena knew this wasn't over. The bear was determined, and with no other prey in sight, she wasn't going to leave until Elena was dealt with. With no time to waste, Elena knew she had to retreat to the safety of her research station. Her supplies were limited, and the radio had been damaged in a storm the week before. But it was her only hope. She hobbled as fast as she could, moving through the forest, her vision blurring from the pain and the loss of blood. The bear followed relentlessly, crashing through the undergrowth with terrifying speed. Elena's mind raced. She had to think like a bear, use her knowledge to survive. She angled her path toward the steep ravine that bordered the station, knowing the bear wouldn't follow down such a hazardous drop. As she neared the edge, the sound of the bear's growls grew louder and closer. Finally, she reached the ravine, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She half slid, half fell down the steep incline, wincing as the jagged rocks tore at her skin. The bear stopped at the top, pacing back and forth, growling in frustration but unwilling to follow her down the treacherous path. Elena collapsed at the bottom, her body trembling from shock and exhaustion. She had made it, barely, but the bear wasn't leaving. She watched as it paced along the ridge, still furious, unwilling to abandon its cub, which it still thought was in danger. For hours, Elena remained trapped at the bottom of the ravine, too injured to move, with the bear still nearby. She needed to get back to the station, but with her radio damaged and limited supplies, her options were grim. Her only hope was to wait, to allow time for the bear to calm down, and then find a way to reunite the cub with its mother. Elena had always known the risks of working with wildlife, but now, bleeding and stranded in the wild, she had to use every bit of her knowledge to survive this ordeal. It was a battle between instinct and understanding, and Elena, in her weakened state, knew she was at the mercy of nature. In January 2018, a group of experienced anglers set out on a fishing expedition in the remote and stunningly beautiful Great Bear Rainforest of British Columbia. The rainforest, known for its ancient trees, crystal-clear rivers, and abundant wildlife, is one of the last untouched wilderness areas in the world. The group, consisting of 4 men, Tom, Richard, Mark, and Steve, had been planning this trip for months. They were all passionate about fishing and had traveled from various parts of North America to experience the thrill of fishing in one of the most pristine environments on Earth. The Great Bear Rainforest is home to a diverse array of wildlife, including the majestic grizzly bear. The anglers were well aware of the risks involved in fishing in bear country, but the allure of the untouched rivers and the promise of catching wild salmon was too tempting to resist. They had come prepared with bear spray and other safety equipment, and were confident in their ability to handle any potential encounters with the local wildlife. The group arrived at their chosen fishing spot early in the morning, just as the first light of dawn was breaking through the dense canopy of the rainforest. The air was cool and fresh, and the only sounds were the gentle rush of the river and the occasional call of a bird. The anglers set up their gear along the riverbank, excited to begin their day of fishing. The river, teeming with salmon making their way upstream to spawn, was a perfect spot for a successful catch. As the morning progressed, the anglers began to reel in one fish after another. The excitement of the successful catches filled the air, and the group was in high spirits. The lush surroundings and the thrill of the catch made for an unforgettable experience. However, the anglers were not alone in their appreciation of the abundant fish in the river. Unbeknownst to them, a grizzly bear was also nearby, drawn to the same food source that had attracted the anglers. The bear, likely defending a nearby food cache or simply attracted by the smell of the fish, had been quietly observing the anglers from the cover of the dense underbrush. Grizzlies are known for their powerful sense of smell and territorial nature, especially when it comes to food. The bear, feeling threatened by the presence of the fisherman so close to its food source, began to grow agitated. Suddenly, without any warning, the bear charged out of the underbrush, its massive form moving with alarming speed. The anglers, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the bear, were thrown into a state of panic. The peaceful morning on the riverbank turned into a chaotic scene as the bear zeroed in on Mark, who was in the process of reeling in a large salmon. The bear, driven by instinct and territorial aggression, saw Mark as a direct threat to its food and attacked with ferocity. Mark, realizing the immediate danger, instinctively raised his fishing rod as the bear lunged at him. Using the rod as a makeshift weapon, he managed to fend off the bear's initial attack, but not before suffering serious injuries to his arm and shoulder. The other anglers, frozen with fear and disbelief, watched as Mark struggled to defend himself against the powerful animal. As the grizzly bear continued its assault, Mark fought desperately to protect himself, using the fishing rod as a barrier between him and the enraged animal. The bear's powerful swipes left deep gashes on Mark's arm and shoulder, but his quick thinking and determination kept the bear from inflicting even more severe injuries. The other anglers, snapping out of their shock, began to take action. Richard, who had been closest to the gear, grabbed the bear spray and aimed it at the bear. The pungent mist hit the bear squarely in the face, causing it to recoil in pain and confusion. The bear, now disoriented by the spray, hesitated for a moment before retreating into the thick underbrush from where it had emerged. The immediate danger had passed, But the reality of the situation quickly set in. Mark was severely injured, his arm bleeding heavily, and he was in urgent need of medical attention. The other anglers rushed to his side, using what supplies they had to bandage his wounds and stop the bleeding as best they could. The remote location of the Great Bear Rainforest made it difficult to call for immediate help. Still, the group managed to contact emergency services using a satellite phone they had brought for such situations. The nearest medical facility was hours away, and they knew that getting Mark there quickly was crucial. The group carefully helped Mark to his feet and began the long, arduous trek back to their vehicle, which was parked several miles away. The journey through the dense forest was slow and painful, with every step causing Mark immense discomfort. The other anglers took turns supporting him, their minds focused solely on getting him to safety. The tranquility of the morning had been shattered, replaced by a tense urgency as they moved through the wilderness, constantly aware of the potential for further danger. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached their vehicle and drove as quickly as possible to the nearest town, Bella Coola, where Mark was airlifted to a hospital. The medical team in Bella Coola was prepared for his arrival, immediately taking him into surgery to treat his injuries. The doctors worked quickly to repair the damage caused by the bear's attack, stabilizing Mark and ensuring he would recover. The encounter left a lasting impact on the group of anglers and the broader fishing community in British Columbia. The incident served as a stark reminder of the inherent risks of fishing in grizzly territory, even for those who are experienced and well-prepared. Discussions about the importance of constant vigilance and the need for enhanced safety measures in bear country became more prevalent as the group reflected on the fine line between adventure and danger in the wild. The Great Bear Rainforest, while still a place of incredible beauty and opportunity, now also held the memory of a harrowing experience that none of the anglers would ever forget.